All right, chaos in Libya. The latest contributing factor is oil prices today hit $100 a barrel. Been a couple of years since we've seen that number. But the spike just part of a larger pattern that we have been discussing on this show. Prices around the world for most commodities, food, corn, wheat, soybeans, sugar, tea, jumping double digits and in some cases doubling in price, period. Some of the reasons, well, the Federal Reserve's policy of printing trillions of extra dollars to cover up the cost of the bailout certainly doesn't help. New demand from China, but it all gets very confusing. And joining us to try to sort it out is our favorite financial analyst and investor, Bill Fleckenstein, hedge fund manager and a commodities expert based right out here in Seattle. And Bill, it's a pleasure to see you.
Thanks for having me back.
So this is confusing. People say, how does what do you mean Federal Reserve money printing is causing corn to be more expensive? Doesn't make sense.
Well, it does seem confusing, but I think I can help you with the connections. Okay. First of all, it's not just the Federal Reserve. In the wake of the banking crisis in 08 and 09, central banks around the world are doing the same thing.
Well, so the Europeans are doing this.
The Chinese are doing it. The Asians are doing it. The South Americans are doing it. Everybody's printing money. So let's do this. Suppose I could magically double the value of everyone's bank account around the world. What would happen to the prices of things?
They would double.
Eventually,
right?
They would. Yes, they wouldn't double quite precisely because a person with $5 in their bank account might only buy an extra egg. Some rich guy might buy a Monet, and all things in between. So it's not symmetrical. And of course, when central banks print money, they don't just put it in your bank account. It goes through the financial system. That's why the banksters have huge profits. Wall Street and the banking system gets it first. It kind of leaks eventually gets into the system. And if it's pervasive enough and enough products start to spike in price, as we are seeing, then psychology changes. So what do you do as a businessman if you think the price of things might go up?
Buy it today instead of tomorrow.
Okay, and if you're a producer, if you're a farmer in China, what might you do?
I would withhold it and try to sell it tomorrow.
And so if more people are buying at the margin and some people are holding back, what does that tend to do?
Makes the price go up.
Even more. And then if you have supply constraints or shocks, then that
like the Libya thing or all this.
That exacerbates things. And if businesses start to hold a little bit more inventory at the margin, just out of protection, that demand can cause prices to spike. So what happens is when you get money printing, it winds up making speculators out of everyone. When we had money printing in the 90s, stocks went up. In the middle part of the decade, it was real estate. And now it's working its way into commodities. And now when prices have started to go up, people's minds and attitudes have changed, and now kind of all hell is broken loose as a consequence.
Yeah, well, because the difference is, it's one thing if you have a technology bubble and, pick your favorite internet stock, it goes up and down. It's more disruptive if you have a real estate bubble, trapping people in their houses and immobilizing a lot of what goes on. But when you double the price of food, particularly in developing nations where 80% of their income is spent on food, if you were to look, it's not fair for me to ask you to channel this, but do you think that the central bankers, not just Ben Bernanke and Tim Geithner, but do you think that the central bankers in general take into consideration this type of an impact?
No. Because they believe their own press clippings. Bernanke said on 60 Minutes that he could stop inflation, like that, right? They think they're all powerful. They know how things work. They wouldn't probably even allow to you that any amount of what we've seen in food inflation has anything to do with them. We even have the ridiculous notion in America that inflation should be calculated ex food and energy. It's just nonsense, right?
But so how do they base that? Because the rhetoric continues. These are not stupid people. Ben Bernanke is not a dumb person. He's not, clearly an incompetent person in the scheme of being able to add and subtract, and he's an accomplished individual. He's an idiot. Far from it. Geithner out today saying to Bloomberg, the economy is in a much stronger position to handle rising oil prices, rising commodity prices. He says, I wouldn't get carried away with it. What is the foundation of their thought as it sits in opposition to something that you or I might say?
Well, remember, inflation's been pretty much under control, other than when you print money money, you don't know where it's going to go. It goes into financial assets. People don't call it inflation. But it's the same thing. You've just debased the value of the currency against businesses or against real estate. When you print money and it goes into goods and services, now you've based the value of the dollar against goods and services, and everyone sees it. So we have had this period where all the money printing has gone into financial assets, and they don't consider that to be something that they've done, and they don't believe that the food inflation and the other kinds of inflation is a consequence of their actions.
Why do they believe that?
Because they think that the things that they decide can't possibly lead to any kind of ill consequences, I believe. Well, I mean, why did Greenspan believe what he did? I mean, I wrote a book about that. I mean, it's shocking what they believe. I can't tell you why. Why do large groups of people like banksters make bad decisions collectively? Individually, they're smart people. How do they drive big brokerage firms like Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns over a cliff? Those guys were smart guys. Collectively, they're just stupid.
That is a bumper sticker if I've ever seen one, Bill. It's a real pleasure, especially to see you in person. Bill Fleckenstein, and the book, The Irrational Exuberance.
Greenspan's bubble is the age of ignorance at the Federal Reserve.
That's it.
That's what you're going to say.
That's what I was going to say.